Circles was one of the things that kind of brought my interest towards this project. I thought, yes, that's I know that we align on that. I thought like, wow, how amazing that finally there is like a test run of a project to create an alternative economy that is more based on the gift economy and exchange, and we can create different kind of value moving away from capitalism, which is exactly what I'm passionate about. And so I was very, very curious and excited to do this, coming also from a little bit of a lay woman perspective in terms of crypto, or in terms of how things work on blockchain and how that can be connected to the universal basic income. However, I kind of demystified it and thought, okay, well, this is graspable. This is what I realized with circles is that how difficult it is to drive any kind of systemic change, and how much motivation and dedication and time it needs from multiple people engaged to actually do this kind of experiment. I would be curious to hear what are your thoughts on why it didn't work out.
In what you're implying, I think I do agree with that, and there's different barriers, let's call it this way. One of them is maybe forcing people to understand crypto things like secret phrase and protecting it, and people end up losing their keys because they don't understand what it means to protect this, and then they lose their money or whatever. So that's one barrier, and then another one is just the kind of errors, if you can't use the system to transfer money, then you're kind of not fulfilling the objective as a currency. So that kind of gets in the way of a lot of people. And
yes.
And then the errors part two, which is just getting an account. I mean, it's just all of this stuff in terms of how the system is built, which so I think if those three things were fixed, it would have been a very different result.
Yes, for sure.
And there's probably other reasons, but and I don't want to be super critical about the team, because they're, from my understanding, they're not necessarily technology people. I think I understand, even maybe they consider themselves as, let's say, political people doing technology or doing crypto. So this brings a different perspective and a different set of priorities. And I think despite that, the functioning thing should be a priority. But nonetheless, there's different dynamics at play. And so they obviously did very well in terms of getting people excited about it and getting a community together that somehow is still, even after all of this stuff has been broken, they're still trying to make things work. So that's something that's really important to recognize, I think. But I guess also there is this mechanism of or let's say the lack of exchange. I think Atmos, let's say in this residency where the concept was we get people to send them our circles, this isn't really facilitating an exchange where we're creating value by being able to get things for circles or by offering things for circles. So therefore the value of the circles is not going to augment. So that's in the residency, but then outside of the residency, I think there's just a tendency for people to think what can I buy with my circles, which is totally natural, but at some point people need to start offering things. And I'm not saying this is a way to blame people for not offering it, but it's just there has to be thought into how do you create these feedback cycles, feedback loops, where people they get something and then they put something back into the system and then we're exchanging with each other, or how do we find ways to give and take, this kind of thing. So I think that part wasn't really conceived, and so we're all just kind of figuring it out on the fly, and that's also fine, but it's not easy. And even in a situation like this residency, we had very favorable conditions, to be generous, because everything is kind of resolved for us and we can just focus on our art or on our community or whatever. And even then it's we weren't using the currency to facilitate any kind of value exchanges. So it just required some work to figure that out. I think Richard was somebody who was really exploring this, and he figured out how to exchange his time for some Zoom calls and then facilitate exchange conversations or lectures, or sell as NFTs, or I don't know, all kinds of ideas. He was really experimenting with that, but there was a lot of deliberate effort on his part to do that. And so I don't know if it's naive for me to think about this, but it would have been nice if like the teams that were conceiving of the software, or at least trying to propagate it through the different communities, if they had a concept or some like sort of ready-made ideas that people could just take and apply in terms of how to trade things. There would be suggestions like, you can convince your local bakery to accept circles for saved food, things that they were going to throw away, but they can give it to you for circles, and then they have something. So this is good, but you kind of have to like dig and make a lot of effort to like make this connection. So I'm not sure what the best solution is there, but yeah, for me that's some idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing, like when you were speaking, that I also realized again is this danger of falling into the same kind of pattern or narrative while having this new tool as circles, but still using it exactly in the same way
we
as
wanted to go beyond capitalism. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that on top of what you just said about the technical difficulties, which I also agree that was the first thing that made it impossible to flourish, but then there is also this proximity of the way we relate with money, that the way we would then relate to circles, in terms of it felt like we're just collecting circles to pay rent, which is not a criticism towards the people who were like running this, because I knew that it was a sort of a necessity, but we were still trapped in the exactly same system of just, collecting capital to be able to buy off like the rent, which was not facilitating any exchange, just collecting.
Did you have like your own ideas about how to facilitate this kind of exchange between people, like things that, like, let's say we in the residency could have done, or people in the larger circles community could have done or can do today?
Regarding circles?
Yeah, like how to actually use it in this more exchange-oriented way.
Yeah, I think, ideally it would be this kind of exchange that we could offer our services or consultations or a massage or any kind of exchange that...
Which we have today. There is the marketplace thing.
Yeah.
So, is there something different from that you're envisioning, or is there something that doesn't allow for it?
No, I'm not sure if we can do more than that, to be honest. I kind of have a feeling that, this tool is also like some sort of limited to that. I don't know if we can do more,
Yeah.
We can for sure do...
Because it's money.
Yeah, exactly. We can do more as humans exchanging, and in terms of gift economy, of course, we can do more. But if we want to operate with a currency, whether this is circles or euros, it's still principle of money, and I'm not sure if we can go further than this kind of exchange.
Yeah. In all of the projects that you've done in your life, like, have you come close to something like this, where you're able to facilitate this kind of exchange in a little ecosystem?
That's what we're doing with Leos when we do residencies in the desert. The residency is based on the program that is offered by all the agents that come signing up to this temporary community. So for example, we have 60 people for 10 days in a camp in the desert. Before the residency, we gather their ideas of workshops, offerings, performances, art pieces, talks that they would like to facilitate, or projects that they want to invite other people to join. And then there's a team that kind of organizes it to some sort of daily structure, which we also experimented with different ways of doing that, from, let's say, more of a linear day-to-day hourly structure to very holistic no time structure of just when the point where the sun is at the sky. We tried different things, but I think this is the closest to what I got from this kind of exchange, because yes, people do pay a fee for a residency, which is a very minimum fee that covers the food and the rental of the space. And it's still subsidized by fundings that we receive. But after paying this fee throughout the period of the residency, which is 10 days, 20 days, or a month, there's no monetary exchange, because the food and the accommodation is covered, and then people just offer different practices, and it works. But it's also very externalized from society or life. That's why I like this poetic space of a desert, because it's somehow easy to create this bubble of utopia or apocatopia.
Apocatopia. People that are exchanging in this space are not doing this in the sense of an economy, and it feels more like they're just like friends, or they're just people that are living together. So I mean, I don't think you're trying to tell, you're certainly not telling them like, okay, you guys can do whatever you want in exchange. Like, I think people are just living there and they're just naturally like collaborating. It just seems very different from, again, using money to exchange things, or even the kinds of things that you would do in exchange for money. Like in a space like this, like a bunch of people, some of them know each other, some of them don't. They come to the desert for like 3 weeks or a month or whatever. They're living together. They've paid in advance for food, and then everything else is just based on their intentions or desires. It seems like, you know, if they're all effectively roommates in the desert, like you might just do something nice to help out your roommate just because they're, or let's say your neighbor, right? Like, I mean, you might help your neighbor without needing to exchange something, just because this is where you live. It's like an extension of you, maybe, because it's your space and we're all sharing the space together. So I feel like there's a natural reflex to just do things and not necessarily exchange, although maybe even an exchange will happen, but it just feels like a different mentality to me.
I'm not really sure if I see a difference. I mean, it's way easier to do it in this kind of closed bubble of 50 people in a micro community, but the idea with this is to actually create an alternative that could be replicated in terms of how we would live, because I don't think personally that we need money in order to live in the ideal world where we could like have food that we grow and access to water.
You know, maybe this is the thing, because it is kind of an apocalypse scenario where there's no, I mean, it's a desert, there's no water, whatever. And so I think in this scenario, like, you wouldn't think about like, well, you know, I gave you some food the other day, so now you have to do something in exchange for me. I mean, you're not going to let somebody starve or something because it's the apocalypse and we just have to
exactly.
have to. So maybe in that sense, like, it's less about exchange and just about helping one another, which somehow it seems different to me.
Yeah, I see that you can see it differently, but I think it has the same root, because I think exchange comes from the point of helping one another.
Originally.
That's what it is, right? Yeah. Because for me, exchange is just that. Like, exchange is not trying to exchange for the same value as you give. That becomes capitalistic then. I think exchange is an exchange of energy. It's basically any kind of relation is an exchange. And if we see it like this, then we're getting out of this idea, like, okay, of measuring time, whether I spend, you know, like now 1 hour on cooking your dinner and you're gonna have to give me a massage for an hour. I don't know, like, because this seems very superficial for me. This is like a way of thinking that we get from being conditioned by capitalism, that everything needs to have a value of exchange. I think ideally we can exchange whatever we want to exchange after we are like satisfied and satiate with our own needs, and the surplus of that time or these resources that I have, I can give. And this is more a gift economy, not an exchange economy.
Yeah.
So I think what is actually important in like, creating this kind of prototypes and projects, it's, I think, that this kind of very personal work of having these basic needs, whatever it means to different people, because that can be very different also, like, you know, what are your basic needs, but having those needs covered, and then the rest, it's kind of a gift, which I think is also the core idea of like universal basic income. It stems from that as well.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think universal basic income is kind of a step moving away from capitalism through the means of capitalism still, using money, using something that we're actually at the deep core of it are trying to get away. So it's, for me, it's like a middle step from which potentially we could fully move into a non-monetary system, but it's a kind of a necessary step to bridge.